Welcome back, everyone. It is week 3 of your master's program, and I am so excited to get into today's topic. So, over the past couple of weeks, we've spent a lot of time figuring out exactly what NGOs are, right? We've talked about their history, their amazing diversity, and those core values that drive them. But today, today we're shifting gears. In this explainer, we're moving from just understanding what NGOs are to mastering how they actually survive. How do they navigate the wildly turbulent seas of the modern nonprofit sector? To answer that, we're going to dive deep into strategy and environmental analysis. Here's our roadmap for today's macro to micro strategic funnel. We'll be hitting 5 key areas: strategy in mission-driven NGOs, scanning the external environment, internal strengths and weaknesses, theory of change logic, and finally, making choices under uncertainty. Let's jump in. Starting off with Section 1, strategy in mission-driven NGOs. Let's actually define what strategic management means in our specific world. When we talk about strategy, Alfred Chandler's foundational definition really hits the nail on the head. He defines it as determining your basic, long-term goals and then adopting the courses of action and allocating the resources needed to actually pull those goals off. Think of strategy as your compass. It's what guides an organization when it's deciding whether to expand, maybe take on a new social function, or shift resources around because of crazy political demands, new funding streams, or some massive technological shift in society. It literally points you true north. But here's the kicker, and it's a massive distinction we have to make between the corporate world and our sector. In the business world, strategy is all about boosting that medium to long-term profitability. But for us, it's completely different. NGOs define value in totally non-economic terms. In the nonprofit sector, we use strategic management to formulate, or honestly sometimes reformulate, our mission and objectives and figure out how to achieve them more effectively to create real social impact. We aren't out here trying to grab market share to make shareholders rich. We're here to fulfill a mission for the public good. Moving right along to Section 2, scanning the external environment. If we want to navigate these waters and achieve our mission, we have to learn how to read the weather first. Look, we simply can't formulate a strategy in a vacuum. We use what's called a pest analysis to systematically map out the big picture environment. It stands for political, economic, social, and technological factors. And as we track these, we need to ask ourselves some really tough questions. Politically, are there new laws coming down the pike, like welfare reforms that'll change how we operate? Economically, what are our funding levels looking like, or shifts in operational costs? Socially, how are the actual demographics and community needs shifting right under our feet? And technologically, what new digital tools are totally altering the landscape? By constantly scanning these 4 areas, we can actually anticipate the storms before they hit us. Now, to get a bit academic for just a second, why does this matter quite so much? Well, it all comes down to resource dependency theory. This framework explains exactly why keeping your finger on the pulse of external funding and regulations is literally a matter of survival. NGOs don't just magically generate their own resources in some closed little loop. We rely entirely on the outside world for grants, donations, and the legal space to even operate. If the economy tanks or the political winds shift, and you haven't planned for it, your organization's survival is on the line, instantly. So the takeaway here is that we aren't just mapping out abstract, invisible forces. We are mapping out actual people and institutions. We have to map the other ships out there in our waters, our stakeholders. Any strategic change you make is going to be heavily influenced by what they expect from you. You've got donors who bring the money, sure, but they also bring demands. You've beneficiaries who rightly expect real social value. You've got government regulators watching you. And hey, don't forget your own staff and volunteers. They need to stay aligned with the mission too. As a manager, you're going to be constantly juggling all these conflicting expectations just to keep everyone rowing in the direction of the public good. Which brings us to Section 3, internal strengths and weaknesses. Once we know what's going on outside, how do we assess if our own ship is actually built for the journey? You've probably heard of this one, the SWOT, or more commonly, the SWOT analysis. This is a super practical, everyday framework you're going to use all the time in your careers to weigh your internal capabilities against those external realities we just talked about. It gives you a fantastic, big-picture systems view of your entire organization. Here is where people sometimes get tripped up, though. You have to clearly draw the boundaries. Strengths and weaknesses, those live entirely inside your organization. A strength is having an incredibly skilled team or a super clear mission. A weakness might be a clunky organizational structure or funding streams that are all over the place. On the flip side, Opportunities and threats are lurking outside, completely independent of you. An opportunity is a brand new foundation grant opening up. A threat is fierce competition or a government that's suddenly hostile to your work. The whole goal is to use your internal strengths to grab those external opportunities and block those external threats. All right, section 4, theory of change logic. We've got our environmental data, we know our internal capacity, now we actually have to chart the course to our destination. The absolute best way to visualize this course is with a logic model. Think of it as drawing a straight, clear line of sight. It connects the initial resources we put in, our inputs, directly through the day-to-day activities of our staff, straight to the outputs of our programs, all the way to the final social outcomes we're aiming for. Whether you want to eradicate a disease or boost local literacy, a logic model forces you to see the big picture. It maps out the messy relationships between your people, your money, and your processes so you can be confident that the good you're trying to do is actually doable. Ultimately, this whole planning process boils down to finding the perfect strategic fit. Strategy is an ongoing search for dynamic congruence, basically making sure your internal operations perfectly match the real, specific needs of the people you're serving. Let me give you an example from the literature. There was an NGO handing out temporary tents after hurricanes in the Caribbean. But that strategy didn't fit the reality that these disasters were happening year after year. So the leadership made a really tough call. They shifted from giving out 10,000 flimsy tents to building 2,000 durable stone shelters. Naturally, this caused some massive friction with their donors and the board at first, but it finally aligned their internal resources with a permanent solution to the external problem. That right there, that is strategy as fit. Finally, section 5, choices under uncertainty. Because let's be real, perfect logic models usually fall apart the second they hit reality. What do we do when the waters get totally chaotic and unpredictable? Enter the complexity perspective. Looking at NGOs through this lens teaches us that strategy isn't always some rigid, top-down master plan drawn up in a fancy boardroom. In turbulent times, strategy is emergent. It's an ongoing, messy, non-linear process of adaptation. It's about self-organizing and innovating on the fly when a crisis hits out of nowhere or a major funder suddenly backs out. As managers, you have to build teams that can learn and pivot continuously from the bottom up, not just wait for orders from the top down. And that brings us to how you actually deal with that uncertainty, especially when it comes from the folks writing the checks. When you're facing wild shifts in donor demands or new legal hoops to jump through, research shows you actually have a ton of agency. You have choices. You can choose to exit, literally just walk away from the funding to protect your core mission. You can use voice, push back, get to the table, and negotiate. You can make an adjustment, weigh the pros and cons, and strategically decide to play ball. Or you can show loyalty, automatically complying because, frankly, you desperately need those resources to keep the lights on. The point is, you aren't just passive victims tossing around in the waves. You are strategic actors. So I want to leave you with this really critical question to chew on as future NGO leaders. You've got the toolkit now, Chandler's definition, the PEST scan, the SWOT matrix, logic models, and complexity theory. But at the end of the day, when the pressure is really on, how are you going to balance those shifting donor demands with the integrity of your core mission? How are you going to protect the very soul of your organization while keeping the ship afloat in a totally turbulent world? Think deeply about that as you prep for your seminars this week. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you all next time.